This story was sent to us by a real listener of Justice Served Tales. At her request, names and details have been changed to protect her privacy. But the truth of what happened, every painful, powerful word of it, is completely real. My mother looked me in the eyes at my own wedding reception and told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My father didn't come at all. My brothers said I was throwing everything away for a man who would never amount to anything. They cut me off completely, no phone calls, no holidays, no contact. They wrote me out of their lives like I was a stranger. For 7 years, I lived without my family. And then one morning, everything changed. Not because I went crawling back. Not because I begged for forgiveness. But because the man they called worthless, the man they said would never amount to anything, had just made us both millionaires. And suddenly, my family remembered they had a daughter. My name is Rebecca and Calloway. I am 39 years old, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee, a city that I chose, that chose me back, and that has been the backdrop of the most important chapters of my life. I was not born here. I was born and raised in a town called Greenville, South Carolina, in a house that sat at the end of a long private driveway behind a wrought iron gate. In a neighborhood where the lawns were always perfect and the cars were always new and nobody ever talked about money, because everybody already had enough of it. My maiden name is Rebecca and Hargrove. The Hargrove family of Greenville, South Carolina. If you are from that part of the state, you may know the name. My grandfather built a regional insurance company from nothing in the 1950s, and by the time my father inherited it, Hargrove Insurance had offices in 4 states and a client list that included some of the largest commercial real estate developers in the Southeast. We were not celebrities. We were not famous. But in the circles that mattered to my parents, the Hargrove name carried weight. I grew up understanding, without anyone ever saying it directly, that the name came with expectations. You married the right kind of person. You joined the right kind of clubs. You attended the right kind of church, and sent your children to the right kind of schools. Love was something that existed within those boundaries, not outside them. I believed that, for a long time. And then I met Daniel Calloway at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, and everything I had been taught to believe started coming apart at the seams. I was 24 years old, and I had just started a job as a marketing coordinator at a mid-size events company in Greenville. It was my first real job after college, not the prestigious corporate position my father had hoped for, but something I had found myself and was genuinely excited about. The farmer's market was 3 blocks from my apartment. I went every Saturday morning for the tomatoes and the fresh bread, and the excuse to be outside in the September air. I had just reached for the last bunch of basil at one of the herb vendors when a hand came from the other direction, and reached for the same bunch at the exact same moment. I looked up. He looked up. He was tall, with dark hair that needed a cut, and paint on his right hand that he had clearly tried to scrub off, and not quite succeeded. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans with a hole in the knee, and he had the kind of smile that arrives slowly, like it has to travel some distance before it gets to his face. "You take it," he said, pulling his hand back. "I'll find something else." "What were you going to make?" I asked. I don't know why I asked. I just did. "Pasta," he said. "From scratch." "You." "Same," I said. We stood there for a moment. And then I broke the bunch of basil in half and handed him one half and said, "There. Problem solved." His name was Daniel Calloway. He was 27 years old. He had grown up in a small town called Gaffney, about 40 minutes north of Greenville, the son of a mechanic and a school cafeteria worker. He had put himself through Clemson University on a combination of scholarships, student loans, and weekend construction work. He had a degree in mechanical engineering and was currently working as a junior technician at a small HVAC manufacturing company, while spending his evenings and weekends developing what he described, with a kind of careful understatement that I would come to recognize as characteristic of him, as a project. We talked for 2 hours at a coffee shop around the corner from the farmer's market. I missed my Saturday yoga class. I did not care even slightly. We dated for 2 years before Daniel proposed. They were the happiest 2 years of my life up to that point, and also the most complicated, because from the very beginning, my family made their feelings about Daniel abundantly clear. My mother met him for the first time at a family dinner about 3 months into our relationship. She was polite in the way that very well-bred Southern women are polite when they disapprove of something, which is to say, she was perfectly gracious on the surface and absolutely devastating underneath. She asked Daniel about his family, his background, his work, his plans for the future, all in the tone of someone conducting an interview they already know the outcome of. After dinner, in the kitchen while Daniel was talking to my father in the living room, she took my arm and said quietly, "He's very charming, Rebecca. But charm doesn't pay a mortgage." My father was more direct. He pulled me aside later that night and said he had looked into Daniel's background, he had actually had someone look into it, which I found both infuriating and completely unsurprising, and that Daniel had student loan debt, no significant assets, and was working a job that paid, as my father put it, a very modest salary for a man with designs on my daughter. I told my father that Daniel's finances were not his concern. My father looked at me with the expression he reserved for moments when he believed I was being profoundly naive and said, "Everything about the man my daughter chooses is my concern." My brothers, I have 2, both older, both firmly installed in the family business, were less subtle. The older one, Preston, told me flat out that Daniel was after the Hargrove money. The younger one, Carter, said he thought Daniel seemed fine, but that I could obviously do better. Daniel knew what my family thought of him. He never said much about it, but I could see it in the way he straightened slightly whenever he walked into my parents' house, the way he chose his words carefully around my father, the way he never let himself be rattled no matter what was said. He had a quiet dignity that I think my family mistook for passivity. It was not passivity. It was patience. Daniel proposed on a Tuesday evening in April, not a special occasion, not a planned romantic gesture, just an ordinary Tuesday when we were sitting on the back steps of his apartment watching the sun go down over the parking lot, eating takeout from the Thai place down the street. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond in a plain gold setting, and said, "I know this isn't the kind of ring your family would expect, but I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." I said yes before he finished the sentence. Just like Savannah said yes to Marcus. Some things you just know. I told my parents the following weekend. The reaction was worse than I had anticipated, and I had anticipated it being bad. My father sat across from me at the dining room table, the same table where we had eaten 10,000 family dinners, where I had done homework and celebrated birthdays and learned to play cards. And he gave me what I can only describe as a boardroom presentation on why marrying Daniel Calloway was a mistake. He talked about Daniel's financial situation, his family background, his career trajectory, the disparity between our upbringings. He talked about what our children's lives would look like. He talked about the Hargrove name, and what it meant, and what it required. And then, at the end, he said the thing I had never expected him to say. "If you marry this man," my father said, "you will no longer be welcome in this family. I will not attend the wedding. Your mother will not attend the wedding. We will consider this chapter closed." I looked at my mother. She looked at the table. I looked at my father. He looked at me without blinking. "Then I guess this chapter is closed," I said. And I left. Daniel and I got married 4 months later in Nashville, We had decided to move there together, to build something new somewhere that belonged to neither of our pasts. The wedding was small. His parents came, his mother cried from the moment I walked in until well after we cut the cake. A handful of close friends. My college roommate as my maid of honor. My parents did not come. Neither of my brothers came. My mother sent a card with a check for $500 that I returned unopened. My father sent nothing. The silence that followed was the strangest thing I have ever experienced. It was not dramatic. There were no screaming fights, no final confrontations, no scenes. Just absence. A phone that didn't ring. Holidays that passed without acknowledgment. My birthday coming and going like any other day. For a woman who had grown up in a house full of noise and family and occasion, the quiet was louder than anything else could have been. I will not pretend it didn't hurt. It hurt every single day for a long time. I grieved my family the way you grieve someone who has died, except that they were still alive, still there, still continuing their lives without me in them. That particular kind of grief has no name and no roadmap. But I had Daniel. And Daniel was enough, more than enough. He was my family now, the one I had chosen, the one that had chosen me back. I need to tell you about the project now. Because the project is everything. When Daniel had described it to me at that coffee shop on our first meeting as something he was working on in his evenings and weekends, I had imagined something modest, a side business, maybe, or a technical hobby. What he was actually working on was a patent-pending thermal regulation system for industrial HVAC equipment that could reduce energy consumption in large commercial buildings by up to 30%. He had been developing the concept for 3 years before I met him. He had filing the initial patent application during our first year of dating. By the time we got married and moved to Nashville, he had a working prototype and was beginning to approach investors. I want to be honest about my role in what happened next, because I think it matters. I am a marketing professional. I know how to tell a story. I know how to build a brand, craft a pitch, identify an audience, and make something visible that might otherwise remain invisible. Daniel had the invention. I helped him learn how to talk about it in a way that the people with money could understand and get excited about. We spent the first 2 years in Nashville pouring everything we had into developing the business. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and drove a car with 200,000 miles on it and ate a lot of pasta and said no to everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Daniel worked his day job and worked on the business. I worked my day job and worked on the business. We were exhausted and stretched thin and completely, utterly committed. In the 3rd year, we got our first significant investor, a commercial real estate development firm based in Atlanta that had been looking for exactly the kind of energy efficiency solution Daniel had built. They came in with a seed investment that allowed Daniel to quit his day job and focus on the business full-time. In the 4th year, we had our first major commercial installation, a mixed-use development in Charlotte that reduced the building's annual HVAC energy costs by 28% in the first year. The client was ecstatic. They referred us to 3 other developers. In the 5th year, Daniel's company, Calloway Thermal Solutions, had 11 employees, contracts in 6 states, and revenue that had crossed 7 figures. In the 6th year, a major national building systems corporation approached us about acquisition. In the 7th year, we signed the deal. I am not going to tell you the exact acquisition price, because some things are private and some things are nobody's business, but ours and our accountants'. What I will tell you is that the number had 7 figures before the decimal point, and it was followed by enough zeros that when our attorney slid the term sheet across the table, and I saw it written out, I had to count the commas twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. Daniel and I sat in the parking garage of our attorney's office building for 45 minutes after that meeting, just the 2 of us, not saying very much. At some point he took my hand, and I put my head on his shoulder, and we stayed like that for a while. The man my family had called worthless. The man my father had investigated and dismissed and refused to walk his daughter down the aisle. The man my brothers had said I could obviously do better than. He had just made us both millionaires. News travels, especially in the circles my family ran in. The acquisition was reported in a regional business journal, not front-page news, but visible enough. The Calloway Thermal Solutions deal. The acquiring company's press release. Daniel's name. And by extension, my name, Rebecca Calloway, formerly Hargrove. My mother called on a Wednesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the deal closed. I stared at her name on my phone screen for 4 rings before I answered. "Rebecca," she said. And then, after a pause, "I've been thinking about you." I did not say anything. "Your father and I," she continued, "we've been talking. About everything. About how much time has passed. About how perhaps we were too rigid. How perhaps we didn't, Mama," I said. "Why are you calling me?" A longer pause. "We heard about Daniel's business," she said. "About the sale. We're so proud of you both." There it was. Proud. After 7 years of silence. Proud now that there was money. Proud now that the man they had dismissed and disowned and refused to acknowledge had turned out to be exactly what I had always known he was. I took a breath. "I appreciate you calling, Mama," I said. "I need some time to think. I'll be in touch." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. My father called the following week. My brother Preston called the week after that. Carter sent an email that was 3 paragraphs long and included the phrase, "water under the bridge," twice. Daniel, when I told him about each call, listened carefully and said the same thing each time. "Whatever you want to do. This is your family. Your decision." That is the man I married. I thought about it for a long time. I prayed about it. I talked to my therapist about it. I talked to Daniel about it late at night when the house was quiet. I turned it over and over in my mind, examining it from every angle. Here is what I decided. I would not pretend the 7 years hadn't happened. I would not walk back into my family's arms and act as though the silence had been nothing. As though my wedding day without my father had been nothing. As though every birthday and Christmas and ordinary Tuesday, when I had missed my mother, had been nothing. But I also would not let bitterness be the last word. Not because they deserved my forgiveness. I am still working on that, honestly, and I think forgiveness is a longer road than people acknowledge. But because I did not want to carry the weight of that bitterness for the rest of my life. It was too heavy. And I had worked too hard to build something light and good to let it be dragged down. I called my mother back and told her that Daniel and I were willing to meet, on our terms, in Nashville, at a restaurant of our choosing. Not at the family home in Greenville, not at a family gathering where I would be outnumbered. A neutral table, just the 4 of us, my parents, Daniel, and me. They came. They drove 4 hours to Nashville, and they sat across from us at a restaurant downtown, and my father, for the first time in my memory, looked smaller than I expected him to. Older. Less certain. He said he was sorry. Not a full accounting, not the reckoning I might have scripted if this were a movie. But he said the word, plainly, without qualification. I was wrong about him. I was wrong to give you an ultimatum. "I'm sorry, Rebecca." My mother cried. She reached across the table and took my hand, and I let her, because she is my mother, and I have missed her every day for 7 years, and being right is cold comfort when the person you want to call with good news is not in your life. We are rebuilding. Slowly. Carefully. With clear eyes and no illusions about how easy it will be. Boundaries that did not exist before exist now. Conversations that never happened before are happening now. It is not the relationship I grew up with, but that relationship was built on conditions I was never willing to meet, and I do not want it back. What I want, what we are building slowly, imperfectly, is something new. Something honest. Something that could survive what the old version could not. If you are watching this and your family has ever made you feel that you are only as valuable as the person you chose to love, or the amount of money in your account, or the address on your driver's license, I want you to hear this clearly. Your worth is not determined by any of those things. Not by anyone's approval. Not by the gate at the end of the driveway, or the name on the insurance company, or the wrought iron fence around the life your parents built. The man my family called worthless built something extraordinary. Not because he had anything to prove. Daniel Calloway has never, in all the years I have known him, done anything to prove a point to anyone. He built it because he believed in it. Because he worked for it. Because he is the kind of person who gets up every morning and does the thing in front of him with everything he has. That is not something you can see on a balance sheet or a background check. That is character. And character, in the end, is the only currency that actually matters. I married the right man. I knew it at a farmer's market over a bunch of basil. I knew it at a small wedding with no family in the seats on my side. I knew it in a one-bedroom apartment eating pasta and building something from nothing. I knew it in a parking garage when we sat together and counted the commas in a number that changed our lives. I have never doubted it for a single day. Choose the person, not the bank account. Choose the character, not the credentials. Choose the love that shows up for you when you have nothing, because that is the only love that means anything at all. My name is Rebecca and Calloway, formerly Hargrove. I am 39 years old, from Nashville, Tennessee. My family disowned me for marrying a poor man. Then we became millionaires. And the most satisfying part? It was never about the money. It was never about proving them wrong. It was about knowing, every single day, that I chose right. Thanks for listening me.